Okay, back with another falsely advertised quick vid. This is probably going to be slightly longer than usual, as always. So, the Molotov cocktail, petrol bomb, and the No.76 grenade, which is also known as the self-igniting phosphorus grenade, Albright and Wilson, or AW bomb, are yet another example of a weapon system that is today synonymous with the Home Guard, and the perceived ad hoc and poorly planned defence of the UK in the immediate aftermath of the fall of France. But is this an accurate depiction of this weapon? Obviously, my long-term and long-time viewers will already know the answer to this. So, whenever these things pop up, today, almost literally sometimes, they're often discovered during development, and their presence is repeatedly attributed to things like secret Home Guard weapon caches or caches and the like. But as I'm sure you've already guessed, the petrol bomb, etc., was not just a weapon of the Home Guard, but also a key weapon of the Home Forces. You know, the often forgotten 1.8 million soldiers of the regular territorial armies and the Commonwealth and Free Forces that were at the forefront of the UK's defence throughout the Second World War. So, the petrol bomb itself is an easily made, hand-launched weapon that can be produced quickly and cheaply from readily available materials. And although this is often derided today and seen as a reminiscent of this ad hoc, poorly planned and plainly crap approach to defending the UK in 1940, the petrol bomb itself was and still is an effective weapon against vehicles both armoured and unarmoured. The petrol bomb itself has remained a relatively effective weapon today, and you look at what the British Army came up against in Basra in 2005 when they lost a Warrior IFV to petrol bombs during fighting there. So I personally think a lot of the derision of the petrol bomb comes from from a general lack of understanding of how effective a weapon it was and is, especially against armour during the Second World War. So tanks themselves are not and were not invincible. They were and still are highly vulnerable to infantry attack unless properly escorted by supporting infantry, and even more vulnerable if lured into close terrain or urban areas. So these are areas where they are vulnerable to attack from all angles, and infantry can easily be concealed effectively from view of the crews of the tank. So in reality, the crew of a tank is pretty much blind and has little visibility, especially when the hatches are closed or, as it's termed, often buttoned up. The tank itself is also not an airtight box. So, you know, these things are full of holes, and especially in 1940, tanks were full of little holes and places where liquid fuels in particular could penetrate. So, in terms of the use of the petrol bomb, which is a term I'm going to try and use and try and keep consistent, but I know I'm going to go off and say Molotov cocktail or Molotov bomb. Although it's often quite obvious that the petrol bomb can set fire to crew and ammunition by seeping through the many crevices and openings of a tank, there are also other risks to a tank from flame-based weapons or flame-producing weapons. So training manuals from the time often point out that the petrol bomb is most effective when aimed at the rear deck of the tank. This is generally the area where the engine is, and it's often an open grill that's open and easily open to penetration from various weapon systems. So the rear deck of a tank is a place where flames can be sucked into the air intakes of the engine, setting it on fire itself, or stalling the engine, or knocking it out. So with grenades, like the No.76 Grenade or the AW bomb, which utilise phosphorus to produce a burning effect, the acrid smoke itself produced could be sucked into the tank's interior via the various air inlets, which would have had a highly irritant effect on the crew inside the tank. Similar with the petrol bomb, where the smoke produced, if that's sucked into a confined space, it's not particularly pleasant for the crew inside. So, it's also not necessary to completely destroy a tank to what's termed kill it. So hitting the rear deck of a tank was a surefire way to get what's termed a mobility kill. So, although I am going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, I might as well cover this in this video because this is something I want to cover in future videos. So, there are different ways in which a tank or armoured vehicle can effectively be killed. Today there are different levels of kill, so trying to get that lined up on the camera when it comes to armoured vehicle. And although the terms I'm going to be using are more of a modern concept, they are still applicable to ways of killing tanks during the Second World War. Firstly, there is what's termed a catastrophic kill, as demonstrated here by the remains of a German Mark II tank destroyed in North Africa. And a catastrophic kill is generally what I think most people think of a tank being effectively killed. This is the complete destruction of an armoured fighting vehicle, either through the detonation of its fuel or ammunition. And again, this is what most people seem to perceive as being a tank kill. But it's not necessarily in most cases. A catastrophic kill is generally not what crews and defenders in 1940 were aiming for. You also have things like a mobility kill, as it's termed today. So a mobility kill involves immobilizing the enemy vehicle. This can be anything from knocking out the engine, knocking out the electrics which supply the engine, knocking out a track, or sticking a crowbar, for example, in the driving gear of a tank. Anything that immobilizes the vehicle and stops it moving. So anything that immobilizes the vehicle effectively is a mobility kill. You also have additional factors like if this is done in a confined space or a choke point like a bridge or other place where the landscape is confined, any immobilized vehicles in that area are going to also halt and deny the passage of follow-up enemy vehicles as well. So if you can knock a tank out on a bridge, enemy vehicles behind are going to have to try and find a way to go around. Also, if the vehicle that has been subject to a mobility kill continues to be covered by effective fire, this can hamper efforts to retrieve the vehicle, so it could be repaired or recrewed. And this can also have an additional effect of leading to follow-up units that are trying to recover the vehicle also being killed. Also, if the crew try to bail out, they can remain under effective fire and be killed themselves. We also have what's termed a firepower kill, and this is where a vehicle's weapon systems or sighting systems are knocked out, making use of the main and secondary armaments impossible. So this is almost as good as knocking the tank out itself. If it can't fire its guns, then the tank is ineffective. We also then, on top of all of this, have what's termed a mission kill. And this is where the tank is damaged or the vehicle is damaged and can't carry on its mission. So essentially denying the vehicle from carrying out its mission effectively, and this stops it taking part in any further actions up until the point it can be repaired or replaced. Similar to a firepower or mission kill are crew kills, and these are quite straightforward, and this is one that I've defined myself. So if you kill a member of the crew, this can make the vehicle inoperative. So if you knock out the driver, you knock out the gunner, or you knock out the commander, this can either hamper the use of the vehicle or make the vehicle inoperative itself. So this is worth noting as well. So you don't necessarily have to knock the vehicle out. If you can shoot the crew, then that's just almost as good as knocking the vehicle out. So the crew may also abandon or bail out of their vehicle, making them vulnerable to being killed themselves. And anti-tank weapons are often used in tandem with other small arms, specifically to kill the crew. Trained and experienced crew are often not as easy to replace as the vehicle themselves. So after all that, there are multiple ways to knock out and kill a vehicle. You don't just have to blow the entire thing up. And generally this is what the defenders would be aiming for. They'd be aiming to not necessarily knock out and do a catastrophic kill on a vehicle. They'd be aiming to do something along the lines of what I've just outlined. Right. So after all that, let's take a look at what the period documents tell us about how the petrol bomb was used and how it was issued. So this is an extract which unfortunately is not very clear, but this is an extract from the 1 Corps Commander Royal Engineers War Diary from around the 8th of July 1940. And this was one of the things that first made me think about how the petrol bomb or Molotov bomb was to be used by the Home Forces. So 1 Corps was responsible for defending Lincolnshire and Yorkshire in 1940. And this entry does, although not wonderfully clear, records how the 106 Field Company Royal Engineers were undertaking the manufacture of Molotov cocktails to be issued to the units of 1 Corps. So 2 days later, after the 8th of July 1940, on the 10th of July 1940, is recorded in the same diary that a total of 4,000 of these Molotov cocktails have been produced and issued to the units of 1 Corps. So that's quite a sizable amount. So just before this as well, in the same month in 1940, the 256 Field Company Royal Engineers, which were based at Bridlington at that time, had undertaken their own experiments with the Molotov cocktail, and they noted that no failures were noted during 12 attempts, and I assume that attempts means chucking the things at something hard and heavy to make sure they go off. But worth noting that here, and a simple design for a Molotov cocktail is produced there as well. And slightly before this, the 2nd Division's Commander of Royal Engineers had put out an order on the 29th of June 1940 showing that his Royal Engineer units within the 2nd Division would start producing their own Molotov bombs under the arrangement of their subsector commands. So they've taken their own initiative here to produce Molotov cocktails for their division. So this is, a sub-level to the to 1 Corps. And it's also worth noting here that they handily mention that it's worth noting that beer bottle crates were the best method of carrying the finished article in motor transport. Always good to know that. Okie doke. So we've seen how some units of the Home Forces, not the Home Guard, set about production of their own petrol bombs with 1 Corps even going to the point of assigning an entire Royal Engineer field company to the almost industrial production of the weapon itself. So how did this look with the units that would have used them? Well, the 8th Battalion King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, who would spend their winter of 1940 defending the east coast around Spurn Point, were issued with 300 of the Royal Engineer produced Molotov cocktails. So they were in 1 Corps. They were likely on the receiving end of receiving the Molotov cocktails produced by the 106 Royal Engineer Field Company. So there are 300 of these issued per company. So assuming that was 300 per company, that would be 1,200 for the entire battalion of these Molotov cocktails, with an additional 315 in the regimental reserve. They were also issued with 276 AW bombs, which is the No.76 Grenade, which again is also synonymous with the Home Guard, with 144 of the AW bombs also in the regimental reserve. So applying my very poor maths skills, that should be a total of 2,763 bombs available to the battalion in winter or November 1940. So you just imagine if every single one, if one of those was used for knocking out a tank, they'd be able to knock out a fair few, assuming that they were able to do it, 1 bomb per tank. Moving forward to 1941, so this is a document that went out on the 26th of April 1941, and this is from the War Diary of the 220th Brigade. So the units of the 220th Brigade were responsible for defending parts of North Norfolk in April 1941. So at the time they had issued 246 Molotov bombs and 432 AW bombs to the 9th Battalion, Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Regiment that were responsible for defending North Walsham at the time. Alongside this, the 65th Searchlight Regiment of the Royal Artillery, who were also under this brigade, had been issued with 120 Molotovs and 24 AW bombs for defending Aylsham, which was their nodal point that they were assigned. So it's worth mentioning here as well that Searchlight crews were also integral to the defence of the ground of specific areas, and often had a greater responsibility for local defence than the Home Guard themselves at the time. So alongside this, we also have a Home Guard platoon that were defending the nodal point of Coltishall. So this would have been the town, not the airfield, and they were given 100 Molotovs and quite a large number of AW bombs, where they received 336. But it's worth me pointing out here that the Home Guard at the time were likely allotted to defend Coltishall, as the regular and Territorial Army units were also close by defending Coltishall airfield. So yeah, this use of the Home Guard to defend a nodal point is likely because they were next to, almost in the immediate vicinity of concentrated regular and Territorial Army units defending a nearby airfield. And then finally, this little note which pops up in the 198th Brigade's War Diary. So the 198th in October 1940 were responsible for defending the Isle of Thanet and that general area in Kent. So what's seen right on the front line today. And they outlined that the local Home Guard would have to draw their supply of AW bombs from the nearest company of regular or Territorial Army troops, but only on action stations being declared. So in this area, the Home Guard themselves weren't even trusted with looking after their own supply of AW bombs. But I say that as a joke. It's more likely that for security reasons, the stockpile of bombs was under permanent guard by the regs or the TA, rather than having unguarded and vulnerable small stockpiles dotted around all over the place. It's easier to concentrate everything in one place to ensure it's properly guarded from fifth column activity, as was seen at the time. So, after all that, the documents give us some actual insight into how the petrol bomb was issued and who it went to, and we can clearly see straight off the bat that the Molotov cocktails, No.76 grenades, etc., 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 were widely issued to the Home Force and were not just issued to the Home Guard. But to point out a limitation in this research so far, this is just an insight into only 3 very small areas in the UK. As a result, more research needs to be properly done to assess how the Molotov cocktail, etc., etc., was issued at a local level. But ultimately, we can clearly see that petrol bombs were issued almost universally, and their issue was controlled by the regular and territorial army at a local level. So as we've also seen, the Royal Engineers were, in some areas, Royal Engineer field companies were producing petrol bombs, Molotov cocktails on an almost industrial scale to, put these things out there and get them in the hands of the people that were going to use them. And secondly, as always, with all this stuff, research is vital. Research, research, research. Very little research has been done, and it's often just assumed for no reason, no actual reason, that the presence of petrol bombs, etc., is in a given area was because of the Home Guard. As always, research is vital, and it's becoming very clear how little research at a local level has actually been done. Local use of the petrol bomb is as always chronically under researched and attributed to the Home Guard, apparently on a whim, and not as a result of any actual historical research. From my research so far, I've seen how the petrol bomb became an integral weapon system of the professional troops of the Home Forces and was widely available, as well as being issued to the Home Guard. But this insight shows how the regulars and TAs, etc., et al., adapted very quickly to the situation they were in following the fall of France in 1940. And it clearly shows that the military were clearly able to effectively produce and use such weapons at short notice, showing much ingenuity in the process, as well as setting up a clear logistics chain to allow their production and ensure they were provided to the frontline troops. Again, this is something that goes overlooked, is the logistical aspect of producing these things. So this goes directly against, as always, the idea that the defence of the UK was disorganised and half-arse. So, although the petrol bomb could be homemade, it was not a poor Heath Robinson weapon and could be massively effective. It should also not be seen as a sign of desperation, but a sign of adapting to the situation in mid-1940 to quickly produce a weapon capable of taking out armoured vehicles. And as I've already mentioned, although it was cheap and effective, in the right hands it could be used massively effectively and deal with enemy fighting vehicles that were present in 1940 and 41. The petrol bomb itself would be an effective anti-tank weapon at a time where anti-tank weapons were few and far between, and where attacking tanks at close range would have been actually of great benefit to the defenders and not the attacker, as long as supporting infantry could be separated from the armour and or tanks lured into areas where their inherent vulnerabilities could be exploited. So the petrol bomb as a weapon system is still effective today in the right hands. So the next time you hear a story about Home Guard bombs being found, have a look to see if there were actually any Home Guard munitions discovered, or or see if these weapons were actually issued to the now forgotten soldiers of the Home Forces. So whenever these things pop up, they are by no means a direct and official indicator of the Home Guard being issued with them. They may well just have been used by the Home Forces themselves. So thank you for watching. Catch you later.